Hello, everyone. Sorry to take a few extra minutes to get set up. For whatever reason, I had to switch browsers and get to what was going to work. Um, so let's see here. I'll get started in just a second, but I want to make sure that people have a moment to get into the room. We are recording. And so this Dr. Kathy's office hours will be available later. You can come back to Facebook and look at it again, and I also post it to YouTube, so you have access to this topic in more than one place. Um, let's see here. It looks like we've got one person has made it. I always ask at the beginning if you can hear me and see me because sometimes I think it's okay, and I might be recording for 10 minutes without anybody mentioning that they couldn't hear me. So in the comment section, which I keep looking over to my right to see, just make a note that you've arrived and you can hear me. So today I'll go through this again more than once, but I want you to know that you can ask almost any question you want in today's Dr. Kathy's office hours. Hi, thanks, Lynette. I'm glad you can hear me. Um, what I want you to do is to realize that it's an open forum. You can ask anything having to do with neurodivergent relationships, but realize that it is a public forum. So if you want to maintain your privacy, you don't have to post a question there, or you can. Leave a question for me after. I'll answer afterwards. I generally go back over and look at the comments after the presentation, so that if you have something private you wanted to ask me, you can do that too. Okay, so today the topic is, I'm looking through my notes here. I'll get it straight. Lost and overwhelmed after years in a neurodivergent relationship, finding yourself again. So in this Facebook Live, I'll talk about what we feel or why we feel so lost and overwhelmed by our neurodivergent relationships. This is no way to live a life. I'll talk about what it takes to find yourself again in the midst of all the meltdown, silent treatment, and the anger. So, sometimes I get feedback from people that things are just a bit too negative, that I'll talk about the meltdowns and the rages and things like that. But it's really what you're living with. Right? It's when people get so stressed by this. Welcome everybody. Let me know you're here. Go ahead and leave a little note in the comment section that you've arrived. I appreciate that. Um, if we don't talk about the hard stuff though, how do we get to the solutions? Right? So I don't want to talk about just why we feel so lost and confused and have lost our sense of self. I mean, I think understanding why this happens to us helps set the stage for what you can do to get better. That's the point. The point is, how do I take my life back from the confusion? So, but let's talk a little bit about this, and I'm also at this Dr. Kathy's office hours. I'm going to list the events that are coming up in February that you can attend, and so let me give you a little preliminary on that one. The idea is that if you're a member of the meetup group, which is a private group, or you're a member of the premium forum, which is also private. These are both places where you can attend these events. In the premium forum, you just pay an annual fee and you can go to as many events as you want to. In the meetup group, it's where people start to just, they start in the meetup group because it's a place to go to get sort of used to this territory that we're talking about, because I launch right in and talk about all these things. It's not anything that I'm afraid to talk about, but sometimes you're so anxious about upsetting your family or talking about, your spouse or a child or your parent, that you want it to be totally private and not disrupt anybody. So these are the primary resources, but I also put in the post today a link to find out more about what's offered. My books, my online courses, um, and participating in the forums is one way for you to talk to other people who are living this life, not just reading my stuff, even though this has been my personal life as well as my professional life, is to work with neurodivergent couples. And by the way, I want to define these things again. Neurotypical are people that are non-spectrum folks, and they have the full range of the empathy triad, and I can explain that more if you want to know. Hi, Nancy. Uh, Neurodiverse are people that are on the spectrum. This forum is primarily for people who have an autistic member of their family, generally a spouse, and the neurotypical. So the neurodiverse people in our group, whether they're in the course or here on Facebook Live today, neurodiverse people are on the autism spectrum. They may also have some other neurodiversities. And then I reserve the term neurodivergent to refer to the relationship. So if you've got a neurodiverse and a neurotypical person, you likely are neurodiverging and sometimes neuroconverging or neuroconflicting. Um, Neurodivergence is because there are very different operating systems for neurodiverse people and neurotypicals. Very different. And that's where we start losing our identity. That's what this topic is today, tonight for some people. Um, the idea is that why do we feel so lost and overwhelmed? Because if you're using your neurotypical operating system to connect and communicate with somebody who's using a neurodiverse operating system, you're just not communicating. And for neurotypicals especially, well, for all human beings, we need to be affirmed that what we're saying, what we see, what seems true for us, we need others to acknowledge that that's true, that it makes sense. I get it. You may see it differently than the other person, but we need to hear that the other person gets our sense of the way it works in the world. Now, neurotypicals generally do that pretty comfortably, right? They're affirming others, and they are waiting to be affirmed. And if they don't get affirmed, then they're going to toss out a message. Are you there? Do you hear me? Do you understand what I'm talking about? Neurodiverse people also need to be affirmed, but they don't reciprocate empathically that they get you. They forget to do that, or it doesn't even occur to them to do that because they're listening to what you're saying, but they're not listening to you in particular. At least it doesn't feel that way. And I can answer that a little bit more, but in a minute. But let me go through the offerings. And I also want to tell you one thing that I didn't post, but I'm really excited about it. I've started a podcast, and I've got, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 episodes up, not too many. But what I'm going to do is, starting this next month, for every podcast that you listen to, I'm going to also host what I call my after party. So you can listen to the topic like you are the Facebook Live today, and then you can sign up for a live webinar where we'll get together with a small group of other people who've listened to the podcast or like the topic, want to talk more about the topic. So you've got this opportunity to learn a little bit about it on the podcast, and then you can get into the room within a few days and talk about the subject. And I'm just getting started with the after party concept because it is just being implemented. So we don't have anything scheduled just yet with that topic. But in the schedule, wherever you see teleconference, that is the date that's going to be switched to the after party. Now, if you've already signed up for some of these teleconferences, that's okay, not to worry. You won't lose your spot. But I'm trying to set up it roughly in those same places, the video conference, the after party webinar on Zoom, where you can talk about the subject of whatever the podcast is about. Okay, so let's go down to our February events. Um, and by the way, the events are, yes, the will be the podcast after party and small group webinars on topics of interest to people in the advanced forum and in the meetup group. And then there's also webinars for people who are taking my online recorded courses. So the meetup group and the advanced forum are for neurotypicals only, but the course webinars are for neurodiverse, neurotypical people. And what's really cool about that webinar is that, and some of you are listening in today that go to the course webinar, is that you not only get to talk to other neurotypicals or other neurodiverse folks, but you get to hear from both sides of this neurodivergent divide. And it's been really helpful for the year and a half or so that I've been doing that webinar. People are really recognizing that they're not alone and that other people recognize these patterns that we have. Gee, I hope people are able to find the live today. I can't check in messages, but it looks like there's only a handful of people here. So hopefully a few more people will find us and come in and talk. Okay, so I'm going to, by the way, if you lose track of when these offerings are being going to be offered, you can find them on my website. You can find them in Meetup. You can go to the Advanced Community Forum if you're a member, and there's a calendar of events there. And all you have to do is click on it, and you're in. Okay, so Wednesday, February 5th is the first video conference, How Do I Stop This Insanity? And again, it's looking at things from that negative place, right? I said, oh my goodness, people say you're always bringing up how crazy it is. It feels insane because you keep trying to communicate the way you do. And if you're with a neurodiverse partner or somebody who's got a different operating system, tempers flare, you feel like something's wrong with you, or you think that the other person's an absolute idiot. And then we're often running on the negative energy instead of saying this isn't insane, the other person isn't bad. It's just that we have to look at this from a different perspective. So the way you stop the insanity is you remind yourself that everything's the way it should be. This is a normal form of human behavior, even if it's very different than your own. And then how do I intervene? How do I still communicate, right? If you keep wanting to prove that you're right or that the other person's wrong or that whatever, if you keep trying to go down your map of reality and don't allow another map to enter into the picture, then you're just going to keep going in circles. Okay, so the next webinar is February 19th, and it's a Wednesday, and it's How Do I Stop the Aggression and Hostility from Ruining My Life? So I like this topic because, again, it's similar to the insanity one, but this one is, how many of you have thought, I wasn't an angry person before I got into this relationship, or I'm just not used to dealing with this level of anger or hostility. But mostly it's like, I didn't expect that I was going to be so angry. And so in order to keep the anger and aggression and hostility from ruining your life, you need to realize that it's a normal reaction to the frustrating neurodivergent collisions. It's normal for us to, it's a signal that the body gives us. The body and the brain gives us a signal that anger means that we've got to do something to protect ourselves, right? The problem is that you're protecting yourself from an artifact, from the difference between these two operating systems. And so protecting yourself isn't really the way to go. It's important to recognize that aggression and the hostility is because the other person or yourself or both of you are alarmed because it's not working the way it's supposed to. And we'll talk about how to take a deep breath and step away from the angry response. Oh, and then another thing that we offer is the next thing on my list here, February 20th. Our ambassador, Julie, offers a free Zoom call for any member. And the title of her event is Going Over the Edge in Your Neurodivergent Relationships. So are you going over the edge? Do you feel like you're losing your mind? Uh, Julie has been a member of our group for many, many years, is very knowledgeable about this lifestyle because she lives it too. And a lot of times people are a bit overwhelmed by stepping into these groups that you've never been in before. So she kind of walks you through how to use the resources, and she's great at answering sort of simple questions or even more complex questions and getting people to kind of find each other and work together. As a matter of fact, Julie's clear in New Zealand, but she has a small group there of people that get together and have lunch and share this lifestyle and are meeting person to person. So you're all able to do that too, frankly. You don't have to go to New Zealand, although that would be lovely. But if you've got people in your own community that you can talk with, you can get together with them. You might meet them on these calls. Okay, and then the webinar for course members, you have to sign up for the course. You have to be taking the course to be able to go to the monthly webinars. But that one will be February 19th, and it's the title is Transactional versus Interactional, Healing the Trauma. So what this is about is that people on the spectrum are transactional communicators. They're answering questions, they're asking you questions. They're gathering data, which is perfectly okay, except that it can feel to the interactional folks as if they're not cared for. So interactional people are the neurotypicals that use empathy as a way to guide the conversation, because the interactional approach is to connect first, talk about the subject second. Right? So when you've got a transactional person and an interactional person, again, the communication can stir up a lot of anger and aggression and frustration. So I think that I think probably one of the biggest helps for you to break through this, insanity, this anger and frustration, and get back to who you really are. One of the biggest things to understand is if you're a transactional person, you're getting angry because the interactional person keeps prompting you to get to connect interpersonally. And the interactional person gets angry because you're trying to connect interpersonally, but the other person just wants to know what the question is or how to answer the question. Hope that makes sense. And then let's see here. And then where it says free teleconference, it's actually going to be it's going to be a podcast. And so I've already actually recorded that podcast, Lost and Overwhelmed After Years in a Neurodivergent Relationship. And then that date will be the after party discussion of the podcast. So you're welcome to do both. You can listen to the podcast. You don't have to come to the after party, but if you want to talk about it or ask questions about what you've heard on the podcast, then the after party is the one to sign up for. And you can sign up for these events at Meetup or my website for the course or for the advanced forum. Okay, so I'm kind of running through my list here. Next month is focusing on why I'm so negative in my neurodivergent relationship. It's kind of the same sort of theme. And that will be, February 25th is when we'll have Dr. Kathy's office hours on that subject. So another thing is that you can leave me questions to answer at the Facebook Live too. All right, you can leave questions ahead of time, and I will bring them into our meeting and talk about it. And I can do that right now, but I need to click on the link that Donna left me. Okay, there we go. And let's see here. I'm looking through my list of questions, and we've got one big one here, really long one. It says, "Hi, dear Dr. Kathy, I just found you on YouTube. We're married 25 years. We have 2 kids. I'm now sure my husband is neurodiverse, but nobody believes me. He's highly functional and able to act empathic to everyone else than me. He doesn't see nor accept his deficits. His strategy is to make everyone believe that it's me who's autistic. He also secretly blames me to be responsible for his depression. He now is retired and it's gotten worse. He's not open to any discussions, blocks me out totally, and demands." Okay, I've had this kind of question before, and this is just heartbreaking, isn't it, when you hear this? What this person is talking about is the usual question of, how do I bring up autism spectrum disorder to my loved one when they don't believe it or they have never heard this before. First of all, we're not getting that problem as much as we used to, because as younger and younger people are getting diagnosed, they actually appreciate the diagnosis. For them, I mean, if you're in elementary school or even a young adult and somebody explains this to you, it's such a relief to know that that might explain some of your relationship troubles. So for younger people, my experience has been they're very ready to hear it and ready to roll with it. But if you've been married for 25 years, like this person is describing, or if you've been walking around with autism all of your adult life, and now at 55 or 65, somebody suggests this might be true, it is hard to believe. You know, you've adapted, you've developed a variety of ways of coping in the world. But all I can say is that if the neurodiverse person would accept that there might be something to this, then you've got answers. You've got ways to expand your repertoire of relationship skills. Having love in your life that works better. It's really worth it. Even if you don't remember, autism spectrum is a spectrum disorder. It's a variety of traits. The ones I tend to talk about have to do with empathy dysfunction and the transactional interactional stuff, because that's the one that sort of tweaks the neurotypical. But you can have other symptoms of autism as well. So when somebody says they don't want to hear it, let's deal with that one. The transactional person is going to enter a transaction with you. If you bring up autism, they're going to treat it as if it's an argument to be shut down. That's a transaction. They're just going to say things like, well, that's not true, or I can't believe you're trying something like that on me, or whatever. It's important not to go into the transactional mode, because then you'll never get anywhere. It's really important to say, I realize this is a surprise to you. I know you want to ask me a lot of questions, but I'm not sure you have enough information to even ask a question. Right? If they've never considered autism, they don't have enough background to even ask questions. So, you know, I think I would, does it make sense when I'm saying stay out of the transaction? Okay? Stay out of the transaction. Whoops. It's telling me that I need to check my internet. I think it's working. Is it working, everybody? You know, put a thumbs up or something for me so I know. Anyway, does it make sense that to begin asking irrelevant questions won't help? And I think it's important for the neurotypical to say, this isn't what I'm talking about. I don't want you to ask me a bunch of questions. I want us to go to a psychologist and learn more. I want us to read some books or to take one of Dr. Kathy's classes and learn more about how this could be true. All right? So the transactional person is used to getting to the bottom of things by drilling down. But the interactional person is used to discovering what's going on by inductive logic. They're expanding their world to include things they've never thought of before. That's just as valid as drilling down. There's a time to drill down, right, and get into specific details. But when you're exploring whether your partner is on the autism spectrum, we need to expand into territory you've never thought of before, you haven't ever looked at before. And this is what these are what my books are about. Written 6 books, folks. These are what my books are about, my blogs, my podcasts, my courses, my support groups. It's all about expanding your consciousness into the topic of high functioning autism. And by high functioning, I want to remind you, this is a disorder, it's a disability, it's recognized by the U.S. federal government as a disability, it's recognized as a developmental disorder by the American Medical Association. So it really is something that we've studied and there's a lot of science behind. All right, but it doesn't mean that people that are high functioning function at the same level as neurotypicals, because they don't have the same skills. They have different skills, which can be incredibly valuable, such as that attention to detail. But drilling down is not the answer to understanding your psychic nature. Drilling down isn't how you get stronger connection with others. We get stronger, we get more introspective and more aware of others when we expand our consciousness to include other possibilities. I hope this makes sense. Nobody's asking me any questions. I'm ready in case you have some. Go right ahead. So, back to our topic, lost and overwhelmed after years in a neurodivergent relationship, finding yourself again. I think that applies a lot to the neurotypical who gets lost because they keep trying to answer those transactional questions instead of to stay with what you know how to do, which is to expand our understanding of each other. So Nancy says, this exchange happened recently. I had a surgery a week ago and have little energy. Oh, I'm sorry. I hope you feel better soon. Every day my Ash asks me if I want to go anywhere, and I say no. The other day my son heard this conversation and told me that his dad was saying he wanted to do something with me, and she says Ash, that's her husband, said that was what he was saying. So I asked, let's see here. So I asked why he didn't say that he had no answer and ended up getting up and leaving the room due to his anxiety. Please explain why he couldn't just say he wanted to do something with me. So isn't that interesting? She's tired. She's recuperating from surgery. He asked her if she wants to go do something. She says, no, not really. I just, want to rest. But he is not using the nonverbal language that I want to share time with you. Are you up to a walk? I want to do some of the things we've enjoyed doing together. He doesn't say any of that. He means it because the son helped her recognize that that's something he intended. But his getting up and leaving the room because he's becoming more anxious with his inability to tell her what he really wants is part of the problem. He needs to stay brave and say, I'm probably not saying this right. She needs to say, is there more you're trying to tell me? Sometimes that helps. Is there something else that you're trying to tell me? But the transactional person stays with, do you want to go for a walk or whatever he was asking of her, as opposed to why he wants to do it. I hope that explains it, Nancy. So the interesting underlying feature here is that her husband wants to spend time with her. He just doesn't know how to get it to happen. So Marilyn says, illustrate drilling down. Okay, good. Many people on the spectrum have professions where drilling down is sort of a requirement, like they're an engineer or even a dentist. Science, the deductive method in science is valued. So drilling down means, asking questions and going after details, pertinent information that makes sense to you. It's not necessarily, though, expanding the territory to understand something that you don't even have a question for. So what happens with neurodivergent relationships, for example, is the neurotypical will find themselves trying to answer the questions that their transactional autistic loved one is asking. They keep asking questions that aren't getting closer to connecting, not getting closer to making the relationship work or understanding where the neurotypical is coming from. It's just helping the transactional person understand something they're trying to understand. So drilling down doesn't bring people closer together, it just elicits information. At least that's what I mean by it. I don't know if that makes sense, Marilyn. Hope so. So this is the reverse also doesn't work very well. So like the comment that was posted for me by a member or somebody who was reading one of my blogs, I think. Oh no, she said she'd been watching YouTube's, I think it was. Um, you know, she may try to understand her transactional spouse by trying to get his interest in learning more about high functioning autism. See, that's a relationship orientation. Whereas he may just need to be able to ask questions. So she could pose it to him like this. She could say, you know, I want you to read this book, or I've made an appointment with Dr. So-and-so to talk about high functioning autism so that you can ask all the questions you might have. Right? Now, that way, the transactional person, the therapist is likely to be very open to answering all those questions, but the therapist is also not emotionally involved as the spouse is. And so what happens is the therapist will answer the questions. I'll ask the question, answer the questions, for example, that they might have about autism, and I'll say, well, how do you think that applies to you? Or why do you think your wife or your husband thinks you're on the spectrum? What do you think's going on there that they might think that? So I try to bring it back to the people involved, not just the factual information. Yeah, Nancy says they seem to care only about facts. It feels, well, in truth, they do care mostly about facts because that's the world that they've been immersed in forever. The facts are what their brains automatically go to. Right? So I was telling this story well, I guess it was last week, or maybe it was yesterday. I just can't remember. I lost track of time. But I was telling this story about a neighbor of mine who's on the spectrum. At least I suspect he is. And when I first moved into the neighborhood, this neighbor and his wife came over and they wanted to visit. And I said, oh, that's nice. You know, and I invited them in and got him a drink and we were sitting and chatting. And then it came out that the reason he was there is that he wanted to arrange with me to top a couple of my trees because we live where there's a beautiful ocean view out there and he's behind me on the hill, and so he has to look over my rooftop to get to see the ocean, which is still beautiful. And he wanted me to top my trees so that he could expand his view. Well, I don't really like topping trees, and I don't have any trees that are in his way. Okay, they're not really in his way. They're way over to the side, but he wanted a 180 panoramic view. And I said, you know, our CCRs are pretty, our HOA rules, or homeowners association rules are pretty clear. You're entitled to a view from the main part of your house, and it's straight ahead. It's not a panoramic view. You get a window view. Anyway, and he said, well, I'd still like you to come over to my house and take a look at our view so that you'd understand what kind of trees need to be topped. And I thought, well, what the heck, I'll go over, but I'm not going to top trees. I don't think I'm in the way. So I go over to his house. I'm up on his deck, and I said, may I take some pictures? Because this is beautiful. And I took pictures, and it's just a sweeping view. And there's a couple of trees way over here that he thinks are in his way. And he asked me again, so now you understand why I want the trees topped? And I said, I do understand that you want them topped, but I'm not going to. And so I said, so I guess I'll just go home now since we don't have anything else to talk about. So I go home. As soon as I get there, I'll get to the point of my story in just a minute. As soon as I get home, he texts me and he says, oh, you left your sunglasses at my house. I will bring them down. And I thought, oh, well, that's nice. Maybe he'll kind of we'll drop this subject and we can move on. So he comes down and he says, I'm kind of disappointed. I thought we could compromise on the trees. Now here's where it sounds autistic. Okay. He said, I thought we could compromise on the trees. And I said, oh, what would the compromise be? And he said, well, I'll pay for half of the trees to be topped. That's his idea of a compromise. And I said, so I'm supposed to agree to do something I don't want to do, and I get to pay for half of what I don't want to do. And he kind of looked at me and he said, well, do you think I'm manipulating you? And of course, I didn't tell him he was manipulating me, but I want to point out the autistic feature here. You can have disagreements with your neighbors about a lot of things. He thought a compromise was getting what he wanted. As an interactional neurotypical, I think of a compromise as a win-win. I give him something, he gives me something, we find some place in the middle that works for both of us. He wasn't offering that. He was offering what works for him. So the danger of being a transactional person is that you go only for the transaction that serves you. Okay, interactional people are looking for, how do we make this work for both of us? Now, does that mean that people that are transactional or autistic don't care about you? Because Nancy says they seem to care only about facts. He focuses on facts, but I think that the transactional person does love you, does care about you, but they don't know that a transactional approach makes us feel as if we are not really valuable. I don't think that's okay. And when I point this out to my neurodiverse clients, they say, oh, I don't want my spouse to feel that way. They're very important to me. I said, well, then we need some practice on how to make them feel more, loved and special. Did I miss any questions? Let me rotate up here, make sure I haven't missed something. Okay. Gosh, not too many questions today. So how about that? Anything else that people need to know? I think I've covered all the bases. The other thing is that even if you're not currently in a neurodivergent relationship, the webinars, the podcast, the after hours party, the after party, these are still places to go to rekindle who you are. If you've been involved in neurodivergent relationships for a while, whether you're neurodiverse or neurotypical, it gets so confusing that you sort of lose track of your own identity. So I think it's helpful to talk to other people who have been through it or going through it or trying to recover from losing track of yourself. So I'd schedule. I'd sign yourself up if you could. Any last minute comments before I wrap it up for the day? Anybody got a question? Because I see there's lurkers out there, so if you have a question for me, go ahead and post it on Facebook or go to my website and post a question and I will get back to you. All right, take care everybody and thank you for joining me today. Bye-bye.